Our next speaker is Mary Alice Arthur, story activist and the author of an amazing book that's called 365 Alive, Find Your Voice, Claim Your Story, and Live Your Brilliant Life. It really made me think a lot deeper about stories we live, not just tell. Mary Alice, welcome to the conference. It's lovely to have you here once again.
Thank you so much. I'm occurring here. I'm actually sitting in Germany at the moment, beautiful sunshine, hoping that all have been enjoying themselves so far. I just saw Karen and I was like, wow, she's on fire. I have to listen louder.
That's good. It definitely is. We are here for you. Let's share our fires with Mary Alice, and I'll be off the air. Let me know when you need the slides, and I'm here for you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much. Hey, everybody. You've been really enjoying yourselves listening into some people who know an awful lot about story who can share their perspectives with you. I call myself a story activist. That means I'm really interested in how stories work inside of us, between us, around us, through us, and what that means. So to have an opportunity to talk about story, which is one of my favorite things, I'm really glad of that. The other thing I do is work with participatory process. So I teach people how to hold good conversations, of which story is a very important part and one of the best stimuluses. So Atum, let's have some slides. I brought some stories with me, actually. As I was thinking about today, of course, what happens for me is I begin to kind of go into story mode the moment I'm going to meet with people, and stories start coming to me. And these are some that I actually brought with me. Last week when I was in Copenhagen, I was speaking with a colleague who had just been at a major car manufacturer in Europe. And he said to me, there's a lot of pain in this organization. So this is a manufacturer, as you can see from this image. Many cars today, or most of the cars today, are built by robotics, and then people finish them off. They do the detailing. So he was working with many levels of the organization, and he said, there is such a hierarchical structure. Maybe some of you notice or recognize that in the way and places you work. There's such a hierarchical structure that many people inside the system feel like they have no agency, meaning they feel like they have no power to change the things that pain them most. And so, of course, the story they start telling themselves is, we don't matter, or we can't make any difference. And he worked together with them to actually find out from them. He said, I'd love you to write down the 5 things that give you the most pain and stress. And let's compare notes and see what comes out on top amongst us. And then let's work and see, what can we do about those things? What would be the next steps? And then they said to him, of course, well, we can't do anything about that themselves. And he said, well, I've arranged for one of the senior leaders to come in and listen to these stories and find out what's going on. And together they decided to do something. So story can really work to help shift how it feels inside of an organization to be one of the people who's trying to fulfill the vision that you're all supposed to be focusing on. The other story that I had came from someone who was working with a part of town in Copenhagen that was well known for being a very alternative part of the community, where people had moved into old housing and were very kind of hippie oriented and very anti-establishment. And things have changed a lot. So the government, the police, and this community began working together. And that's the first time that's happened in the past 40 years or more. So this young person was engaged to help make an entrepreneurial training happen, which he did, and that was successful, but he noticed it wasn't working. Somehow people inside of this community weren't speaking together, weren't working together. He said, I think I've discovered what's happened. They've just lost their identity. And I looked at him over the coffee we were sharing, and I said, you know what? They've lost their story. That's what's happened. One of the most important things when a big change happens is to help people find their identity again, to find the story that they're following. In fact, you could say all of the world at the moment is in that state where we've lost our story. It's coming to the end of the old stories we've had. And we need to begin to move to our new stories, but we don't know what they are at the moment. And so he finds himself sitting in this. And maybe you do too. This morning, I was talking to my client. I work with IKEA, and they're going through some major restructuring. And so for them also, it's a change of story coming up right now. Who are they? As in rolling times, the staff are beginning to find out whether their job functions still exist or not. This is a thing that's happening all over the world. So these are the two stories I'm bringing that are kind of influencing how I'm approaching you today, because I think some of this might be happening for you too. It certainly is happening around. And then I'm also bringing two things about story that for me are quite important. The first one is, with so much AI around, we are beginning to ask ourselves, is what I'm looking at real? Is this actually a real person? Is it a real voice? Is it a real image? So there is a real need. There is a real need for realness. I don't know how you say that grammatically, but we want to know what's real and we want to know what's authentic. So when we talk about stories, this whole line of, is it authentic? Is it real? Is it true? Is coming up even more right now because we're in that stage where we don't know what's true anymore. We also, the second thing is happening right at this moment is an even deeper layer of longing for connection. And that's, of course, what stories can do for us. I have put here a picture of a mushroom because the mycelium sheath, the mushroom kingdom, is what connects all of the trees. And that's how they share information and nutrients, let each other know when attack is coming up and how they should respond to it. So the nature is connected through the mycelium. And I was reading in a book recently, the mycelium, the mushrooms even influence the rain. So we are living on the foundation of the mushroom kingdom, you might say. If you ask me, what's the mycelium for human beings? I would say story. It's the way we exchange information and nutrients. It's how we decided millennia ago to remind each other how to survive and also how to thrive. We developed this form that helped us capture information and share it with each other so that we could remember. So that when things happened and things were at an end, we could remember how not to do something as well as how to do something. So this need for something real, this need for connection is increasing and increasing at this moment in time. It's everywhere in our humanity, and it's certainly in every organizational structure. So as I look at what is story from my perspective, what does story actually do for us? It does these things. In organizational structures, it's the hidden currency. You know, story wins over data every time. The story we're telling ourselves about what our leaders are intending for us, doesn't matter how much you back that up with data. If the story is stronger and the story is more believable and the story is being shared out there, then it wins. So story trumps data every time. The second thing that story is a living culture. You know, your organizational structure is a living culture. It's like a pot of yogurt in the back of the fridge. It's alive, and it depends on what you feed it as to how good it is for you. So, you know, the more negative and nasty and complaining stories that are fed into a culture, the more that culture will start to resemble those stories. So one way you can tell how your culture is going is by what kind of stories people are sharing, because it's a living culture. And story is a way to balance task, people, and turbulence. So many organizational structures I've worked in have said, you know, why do we do that fluffy stuff? Why do we have to introduce each other? We should get on with the task. The challenge is when you come to a turbulent time like we're in now, we need enough connection in order to ride through the turbulence, to stay together for long enough to do the good work. And unless we have relationship, we actually can't do the task. And story is a really key way to make relationship. So these are all things that are in the back of my mind as I'm thinking about a particular thing called Chief Story Officer. I'm going to get to that in a moment. But what I want to say first to you is that story is always happening in organizations, and it's happening actually in every meeting you're having, because a meeting is actually a story. So here is a diagram I use. It's called the breath pattern. This is a shape that is true for every meeting, that even if it's a 1-hour meeting, or if it's a 3-day meeting, or if it's a 5-week thing, every time we meet, it follows the same pattern. And we call it the breath pattern because there's in, there's the top of the breath, there's out. This is a thing a human being does to stay a human being. So if there's nothing else you learn from this time with me, please keep breathing. It's a good way to stay human, and it's a good way to remind yourself how the architecture of any meeting goes. So here are the pieces. First of all, we show up, whoop, that's the coming in too fast, but maybe it's there. We show up with our story. Then what happens is what we call divergence. We get to see who else is in the room. What else are they bringing? What are the questions? What are people interested in? Eventually, we hit the edge, what I call the edge of our known universe, if we're trying to explore something new, and we come into emergence. We come into the not knowing. We don't know what to do now, and we spend some time being confused to try to figure out what we do next. That's why this is also called, in the way I work with it, the groan zone, because often that's how it feels. Ugh, I don't like being in this place where I don't know the answer. Sometimes people try to force the answer to come too fast, and that is sometimes leading to, we've got the ladder against the wall, like we know what to do, but we figure out later on it's the wrong wall. So to really get clear about what we're doing, we need to stay in the not knowing for long enough. And then we come to what's called convergence. That is, we come to an action plan, we figure out what to do, and we take the next steps. So we've effectively put our pieces together. What this mirrors in a story form is beginning, middle, and end. As we know, this old adage, every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But what we forget is there's the beginning of the beginning, the middle of the beginning, the end of the beginning of the middle of the middle. So you could find yourself in any part of this story. How do stories work? The beginning is all about something new. It's about discovery. It's about feeling the call to something. So often the start of something is kind of exciting, and many of us enjoy that part a lot. Then we get to the middle of the story. This is where it gets messy, it gets confusing, it gets challenging. Some of us want to run screaming from the room saying, I hate myself and I hate you all too. I want out of here. And that's often when we try to force a conclusion so that we can feel more comfort. This is the part of the story that everybody loves when they're watching a movie or reading a book. The messy middle, we love it because we're going, is that person actually going to do the heroic thing and become who they possibly could? Or is it a bad guy who's really a good guy in disguise? You know, what is really going on? We love the messy middle, except when we're living in it. And right now on the planet, we're in the messy middle. This calls for us to have enough stamina and resilience and find each other so that we can actually do the good work together. So the end of the story is like convergence. It's where we get to clarity. It's where we get to confirming the next steps. So every story is, or every meeting is actually a story in disguise. And when you know that, then you know the bits of how to play with a meeting too. Because when you open a meeting, you need to be helping people be clear. Here's where we think we're going to. P.S. We might get lost in the middle, and that's okay because we might discover something new, and then eventually we're going to get to clarity. When people know this is the natural way that a meeting unfolds, they don't get so disturbed that they leave or pull out. They stay with it because they know it's like a story. Eventually we're going to come to the end. So this is what we call the breath pattern. Us starting up, hoping for a good outcome, thinking it might be a linear process, finding out it never is a linear process if anything good is going to happen. and then coming in the end to a convergence where we know the next steps and we can take the next steps together. What I've learned out of studying this pattern around conflict, and right now it's really important to know what to do about conflict, but from a story perspective, here's what I've learned. We get into conflict when either we believe that other people are in the same story as us and they're not. So think about any transformation process you've ever seen in an organizational structure. Those people leading the change are enamored with the storyline. They're in love with it. They can't understand why anybody else wouldn't be in love with this great transformation they're about to host. But they've been in that story for some time, and they forget that some of us haven't even said goodbye to the old story yet. We don't know what they're talking about. So those people blame us for dragging the chain or impeding the action or getting in the way or being a skeptic, because they are already in a different story to us, and we're not in the same story as them. So that's one place conflict comes from. We think people are in the same story as we are, and they're not. Or this other thing, we believe that people are in the same part of the story that we are, but they're not. So I've realized over time that most conflicts are in fact story conflicts or narrative conflicts. It's all about where are we in the story, and even are we in the same story? And none of us see anything the same. So the challenge of being in the same story is really high. Even in a place like IKEA, IKEA is known as an organization around the world for having very strong values. It came from a family organization. Then the founder of IKEA had very strong values. It has a very strong value culture, but still they're in the same challenge right now of not being in the same story or not being in the same part of the story as each other. So this isn't new or strange or different. That's just how it is for most people. So here's a little framework to consider when you're thinking about working with story in organizations. This is what I call the leadership story framework. It's got 6 parts to it. Find, harvest, craft, engage, evolve, and be. So I want to step through each of those parts with you and look at that from 2 different perspectives. The first is you can look at it from an individual perspective. If you are attending here and thinking, I want to improve my own story skills, and many leaders around the planet are working on this kind of thing. They want to improve their own story skills. Then we're going to read the top line there because that's you. If you are thinking about the chief story officer and you're thinking, how do we work with stories systemically? The bottom line is for you. And both of these things can be true at the same time. You can be working on your own individual skill and capacity or helping the leaders that you work with do that. And you can also be taking a look at the meta level, the wholeness of the organization. So not the individual micro level, but the meta level, the overall, and saying, how do we work with stories systemically? It's not just about telling a better story. It's about living into a better story together. So here on the top line, we have tools and practice. What are the tools you need to think about as you're working on stories? And the first part of this framework is about finding stories. Where do I find the stories I actually want to focus on? From a systemic point of view, it's about method. So how can I help my organization to become more story aware? How can we all, maybe there is a time, and I worked with a banking system where they encouraged the senior leaders, this was the top 350 people in a large organization, to be story catchers. In other words, to be looking out for good stories that they could share and work with so that they were much more aware of the stories that were going on in the organization. That is a method and a practice. So where do I find the stories, and how am I giving myself the capacity to actually know what I'm looking at and know what I'm looking for? The second step here is called harvest. So if I'm going out to find a bunch of stories, it's like gathering a bunch of produce in a basket. I've got a whole bunch of stuff, but what does it mean? And how does it fit together? So on the individual level, we're talking about meaning making. What do these stories mean? What's their meaning? And on the systemic level, we're talking about sense making. In other words, okay, if it means that, so what? What am I going to do with it? How do I make sense of what's going on and help it step forward? The third step here is called crafting, or craft. So shaping the stories so that they are workable, so that they are, if you told your day at the office as a story, there's a whole lot of detail you could bring, and much of it would be irrelevant for the point you're trying to make. So how do I craft the story so it makes the point I'd like to make, or shows off what I've learned in the way I want to show it off? The fourth step is called engage. So this is about perfecting as an individual my story skills. How do I tell that story in a way that helps it to reach people? I once experienced a young guy from Northern Ireland telling a story, and some others were in the audience with me. It was very moving what he was telling, but the other people next to me said, I don't understand why I'm so moved. He spent the whole time looking down at his feet. He was so overcome himself that he couldn't actually look at the audience. And I said to them, what do you feel? And they could feel his pain about trying to help somebody who'd been a victim of a bomb blast and not being able to do very much and handle the loss of this family for the person who had been taken in this blast. So all of the emotion was there, all of the elements that helped us to feel it were there. He just didn't look like a polished storyteller to the person who was sitting next to me. He wasn't a performance storyteller. You don't have to be a performance storyteller to make your story come across, but you do need to have emotion and commitment with it. So how do you help yourself learn that kind of thing? So this is about hosting your own story. On a systemic level, you need participation tools. How do I help people to engage with this story, to work with this story or what it opens up for us in such a way that it makes sense and it helps things happen? So this is more about leader as storyteller and leader as host, hosting the space for the story to engage people and move them on. And then, of course, for the fifth step, the moment you start sharing a story, it starts evolving. It starts to move and change and have different life. If you've told many stories, you know that telling to different audiences, even if it's the same story, something different will happen because they're listening in a different way, or the frame of how they're listening or where you are is different. It'll come out in a different way. It's never the same unless you're performing a literary story that has to be told exactly the same way. But we're not in that game. We're in the it's real life and it's real story thing. So for an individual, this is about story making. How do I find the stories in my life that could be valuable to help me evolve as a leader and to help how I am relating to other people evolve? Like if other people know more about me, can we have a deeper connection and a deeper strengthening of our connection to go through turbulent times together? That's one reason to tell stories as a leader. And on a systemic level, this is about story shaping. Is the culture we're living in, which is shaped by the stories that we're telling, a vibrant one? That means really alive? Is it really engaging people? Is it getting the best out of people? This is about story shaping. The stories you as a leader tell, and especially as chief story officer, help to shape and evolve the culture that you're in. This is story shaping. And the final step is to be. Can you live the storyteller's life? I guarantee you, once you start paying attention to stories, you will see things quite differently. So as an individual, this kind of practicing is your learning edge. And systemically, for an organization, this is a practice edge. Can we work with our stories and be aware and conscious of them because they're helping to shape who we are and how we see the world, and more importantly, how we see our agency in the world, our ability to do something. So let me just step through this as an example of what do I mean by this. So here's the first bit around find. Here's me doing a little brainstorm about the concept of leadership. These are some things I might note down in my brainstorm. I want to find some, I think leadership is the subject I want to focus on. And now I'm going to find some stories. Where could I go looking? I could go looking in try to find the needle in the haystack, or I could get a bit more refined about how I'm going to do that. So here's my brainstorm. Okay, what is leadership for me? What were some of my early role models in leaders? How did I learn, how I saw it then and how I see it now? What have I learned about being a leader? Then maybe I want to have a look here, leaders who inspire me. That's a nice place to look for stories. So maybe I want to think about some of my strengths. What are my strengths? What am I refining right now? What am I aiming for? There might be some stories there, or there might be some stories on some of my biggest lessons. Things that a failure is a good place to find a good story, actually. And I often say to people, I love learning, but not necessarily in the moment when it happens. So that might be something I'm looking for. I might be looking for examples of leadership from different levels in our organization. Maybe how we help each other lead, if that's what I'm interested in, or what kind of leadership do we need now? And maybe that's about asking more questions, or it's about across the generations. So there's some issues coming up in many organizations across generational difference. So maybe I want to look for some stories there. From a harvesting component, let's say I chose examples of leadership from all levels. So I might decide that's actually where I want to try to find some stories. Now I'm going to go out looking for them, and then I'm going to harvest. I'm going to look at what I've collected and decide, what am I going to do with it? Which of these avenues or things I've collected could work together? Which of them give me a pathway to show people something if I want to encourage leadership at all levels? How do I do that? So that's the harvest component. And then I would go on to crafting. So this is putting together the story to fit the needs that I have. Maybe I want to, if I do want to call attention to leadership across all levels, then I need to work on my story material, the things I've gathered. This is like turning your vegetables you've gathered into the dinner that you're going to serve people, and hope that they digest it and then make something out of it, build something out of the nutrients they've received. That's maybe a good metaphor. So here's a picture of a person doing a template, doing with Post-it notes, laying out what are the different bits of the story and how does that fit together? And where do I want to end up at the end? What do I want people to get out of what I'm telling them? So this is the crafting piece. Then we move on to engaging people. And I often engage people with some exercise, like here's a trio storytelling exercise. It has three roles in it. It's a rotating exercise. In other words, within the time that we have, everyone will take each of the roles, one after the other. So there's a storyteller, a harvester, and a witness. So this is an example of an hour or 45 minutes, kind of asking people to share stories in a way that we can learn from lived experience. So this is calling on the power of lived experience. So maybe I've told a story about leadership at different levels, and I'm asking people, take us to a moment when you received a profound learning about leadership. What was happening? What did you see, and how did it affect you? So whoever is the storyteller is in their memory taking us to that moment of, oh, I remember when it was one day in June when ... right? The harvester's job is to really be listening to the content. So here the harvester role says, note down the elements that create good leadership that you discovered in the story. What enables good leadership to happen? If we know more about what enables good leadership to happen, we can help it happen more, right? So this is looking for the root cause inside of what we're trying to learn about. And the witness is really to reflect back, here's what touched me about your story, here's what I see in you as a leader. This is to give the context back to the person, to kind of, when we tell stories in this way, we redignify each other. There is more connection between us, and there's more respect and understanding between us as well, because we've had the chance to listen to somebody's personal experience. So this is really inviting people to work with the theme, to engage with the theme, to take it further. And when you do this, what we talk about in facilitator speak is this patterns the space. In other words, if I spent time and I've listened to 3 stories about leadership across different levels, I am engaged in looking for that because my mind has already been patterned to say, that's interesting. Let me see more of that. So this is one way that you can get more stories to come alive that along a theme that you're looking at, because you've engaged people in working with that and it becomes alive inside of them. And then we get to the evolve piece. So where does the story go from here? And how can the story evolve as you continue working with it? So this is one way you keep the system engaged in it, number one, and then you see what happens and how do we need to, what impulses do we need to give in to help things move in a certain direction or away from a certain direction. So this is the evolve step. And then finally, the being is about the storyteller's view of life. So this is about seeing stories everywhere. How can I help my senior team and the rest of the organization know the importance of stories because they're helping to shape how we view the world, and also be engaged in being that sensitive to what stories are alive in our system, not just what we think needs to happen, what's in the annual report, what we say are in the vision and value statement. By the way, often those go dead after a while. If you don't tell stories about your vision or your mission statement, it becomes just a calcified thing on a wall. Really, it's not alive anymore. So these are the steps I'm seeing. And if you ask me what a chief storyteller or chief story officer is, I think these are 4 of the capacities. So number 1, story catcher. This is somebody who has their finger on the pulse, somebody who has got the listening ear, who is catching the themes that are happening inside of the organization as people are doing their natural work together day by day. Secondly, a curator. So somebody who is making visible, just like a display of an artist in a museum, that's a curated piece. Just like something in a museum would be focusing on some kind of theme, a chief story officer can help to uplift and make visible some of the things that are inside the structure. Also, I think a chief story officer is a way shower, somebody who, like other leaders, is pointing to, there's the vision, that's the way we're going. Here's the way that our leaders are telling this vision and helping people see it. Let me help that step down through the organization. And as Karen said, connect across the whole of it. You know, how do I help stories have life right across the organization at different levels of magnitude? And finally, this word entelechy, an entelechy whisperer. I've put a picture of an acorn here because the entelechy, this is the Greek word for the internal possibility or potential. The entelechy of an acorn is to turn into an oak tree. You're not going to get a different kind of tree out of an acorn because its entelechy is to become an oak. So how do I help the organization to discover its powerful potential and possibility, the entelechy of this organization working together? That's one of the roles, I think, of a chief story officer, to be the entelechy whisperer or the possibility or potential whisperer, and to help others realize their potential through listening to that kind of internal whisper. And you know, you have to be kind of attuned to story. You have to have your story antenna up in order to help that happen. My final page 2 is this is how you find me and this is what I do. Less important than, so never mind about that. You'll see that later when you get the handout. Please take the page down now, Artem. And just want to say, wishing you the best in this discovery. This kind of way of working, thinking about chief story officer, is quite different from most organizational structures. This is moving away from traditional marketing and comms. That's not what we mean by this. We mean the lifeblood, the currency, the viability, the vitality of an organization can come through this role. So best wishes to all of you.
Thank you so much. It was practical on one side, and then again this spiraling into something more embodying stories. This is just a lovely combination. We have a question which I second in the chat from Michelle. He's asking, I'm curious, is it worth to even start making any effort in an organization if its core is anti-contextual, not pro-contextual?
If its core is wait a second. You said that's in the chat window? I think I have to view this. Where is this question?
Yeah, it's right below my messages
If its core is anti-contextual. Okay, say something about what you mean by anti-contextual. This is not something I have heard most recently, so I'm going anti-contextual. You mean if the core of the organization is against stories?
Yeah, it's like an organization built around numbers and not context, not the specificity. But that's my interpretation. I'm not sure if that's what he means.
We don't love the warm and fuzzies, so what do we do about that? You know, the interesting thing is to start using stories without saying that you're doing that. Because actually, all the numbers need to have a story around them if they're going to make any sense to people. You know, it's like just a dry number starts making people feel stressed and full of anxiety if they're not meeting this number. So in interacting with people, you need stories anyway. So start small and start wherever you can. You know, I know some of my US colleagues say when they come to Europe, especially the Europeans go, we can't do emotion like you guys. That would be totally out of character. You don't have to. But giving the story gives some context for people to understand the why behind the numbers. And most of us are that way oriented. Unless we have a why, we can't bring all our power to it. So I've had people tell me what to do, and I'm kind of like, but why? You know, because if I can understand that, then I can bring my energy to it. But if I don't know why, then I can't. You know, then nothing is alive, really. And then you lose out the power of your working team, that's losing a lot, actually. So I favored the Leonard Cohen moment. You know, Leonard Cohen had that song, there's a crack in everything. That's where the light gets in, right? This is ring the bells that still can ring. You know, so start working small wherever the crack is. That's what I'm for. You know, don't go into the heart of the beast and with the sword and go, this is how it has to go. Start working, and then when you get some success and they say to you, what are you doing over there? You can go, oh, well, you know, I call that the sneak up on them approach.
That's lovely. We have amen coming from Cecilia on your last point. Light guessing in. I love this song. All right. One final question from myself. You've probably heard it from Karen, but here's it once again. So story can be applied in various ways. If there was only one way you could apply it, or one area or one task you could solve, what would that be?
Oh, I definitely am the big picture gal. So I would be, if story could help us understand who we really are and understand each other, the world would be a vastly different place. And you know, this is the interesting thing. I remember distinctly when I was in Russia in 2019, and I did a story. That's when we met, actually. And I did a story workshop. And at the end of that, somebody said to me, and he was truly, truly curious, I have this warm feeling around my heart and I don't know what it means. And I was like, dude, that's a story, you know? That, you know, reminding us of our humanity is the most important thing we could possibly do, in my opinion. And then we get to what Swedes call business, which is narumsliv. It is, business is about supporting life. I think that's a unique orientation and a really beautiful one. So, you know, how do we help each other have the most life and vitality? That's how I would apply the gift.
Oh. I thought something like this would be coming from yourself.
Yeah.
This was incredible.
You saw me coming.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Thank you so much for coming once again, and for bringing the stories and the concept of this, like 6 steps, which like is an incredible combination. Thank you so much. It was really practical.
You're
and meaningful.
Welcome. Have a lot of fun, you guys, with the rest of the conference.
Thank you.